Have you ever wondered how airplanes are made? Well, it turns out the process is a little more complex than some guy in a garage. Hammering on a metal tube with the occasional wing nut and bolt. In fact, creating an airplane involves so many different moving parts and pieces that you cue in to really understand the process until you see it for yourself. So today we're taking a trip to one of the biggest factories in the world, 747 making factories. That's right, we're going to find out what goes into making the world's largest aircraft. And don't forget, if you want to see what else goes on behind the scenes of the biggest industries in the world, there are plenty more videos where this came from. So be sure to stick around. Our first stop on this tour of the world's largest aircraft factory is none other than Washington State, the home of Boeing commercial airplanes. From this factory complex, which sprawls across nearly 1,300 acres, comes every Boeing 737, 747, 767, 777, and 787 that you see flying overhead. These facilities are so large they even have their own fire station, a full-size fire tower, and an emergency rail line that runs through them, because why not? But perhaps the most iconic building on the grounds has to be the massive paint shop, a cavernous space that measures 1.2 million square feet. It's so big it could fit 28 American football fields inside. Even the tallest elephant couldn't get its trunk wet in here. When asked about working in such a vast location, one employee said, "It feels like you're always looking for your next work assignment, because you never know what area you might need to go to next." The paint shop is responsible for painting every plane that leaves this factory, and each one gets a coat of environmentally friendly water-based paint. Once a plane is finished being assembled, it rolls out of the factory and directly into the paint shop. Here, robots armed with paint guns spray the body of the plane with a base coat, while others apply an epoxy primer. After the base coat dries, another team of robots applies several coats of clear coat. Finally, a crew of detailers inspects the paint job for any imperfections and touch up any spots that need it. The entire process takes about 2 days and uses over 1,000 gallons of paint. Once the paint is dry, the plane is ready to be moved outside for the first time. It's moved by a specialized vehicle known as a transporter. The transporter is a combination of a truck and a train car. It's used to move the plane from the paint shop to the delivery area without damaging the runway. At this point, all that's left to do is attach the wings and tail, then add the finishing touches before delivery. The process of assembling a single wing for a Boeing 747 is actually much more complex than you might think. In fact, it involves dozens of steps that take place over several months. We'll break down just a few of these steps here. Trust us when we say there's a lot more that goes into making a single wing than meets the eye. The first step in assembling a Boeing 747 wing is to create the ribs. The ribs are the backbone of the wing and give it its shape. They're made from aluminum and are incredibly strong, able to withstand the immense forces that a wing is subjected to during flight. Each wing contains dozens of ribs, and all of them must be precisely machined to ensure they fit together perfectly. Once the ribs are finished, they're transported to another part of the factory where the skin of the wing is attached. This is done using a process called riveting. Rivets are simply small pieces of metal that are used to hold the ribs and skin together. They're replaced in holes that are drilled into the wing, and then they rehammered into place using a special tool called a bucking bar. This process is repeated until every rib is securely fastened to the wing skin. Now that the wing has been assembled, it's time to attach the flaps and ailerons. These are small, movable surfaces on the wing that help the plane control its movement through the air. They're attached using the same riveting process that was used to assemble the rest of the wing. With the flaps and ailerons in place, it's time to add the leading edge and trailing edge devices. These are small pieces of equipment that help improve the aerodynamics of the wing at high speeds. They're attached using a combination of rivets and bolts. The final step in assembling the wing is to install the wingtips. Wingtips are simply the ends of the wings, and they come in a variety of shapes depending on the type of aircraft they reattach to. They're attached using a combination of rivets and bolts, and they complete the assembly of the wing. At this point, the wing is complete, and it's ready to be lifted onto the fuselage of the aircraft. Once the wings are in place, the next step is to attach them to the fuselage. This is done using a combination of bolts and pins. The wings are then secured to the fuselage using cables and turnbuckles. You can probably imagine, the tail assembly of a Boeing 747. It's much more complex than simply slapping a vertical stabilizer on the back of the plane and calling it a day. In fact, there are dozens of steps involved in creating a fully functional and secure tail assembly. But don't worry, we've got you covered. Let's dive right in. First up is the keel assembly. The keel is the center section of the vertical stabilizer and provides a strong attachment point for the rudder, elevator, and trim tabs. It's made up of two long vertical plates that are joined together at the top and bottom. First, the edges of the keel are riveted together, and then it's attached to the rear of the fuselage using large bolts. Next, we have the rudder assembly. The rudder is the large hinged piece of the tail assembly that controls the direction of the aircraft. When the rudder is moved to the left, the nose of the plane moves to the right, and vice versa. The rudder is attached to the keel using a hinge-like device called a pintle and a clevis. The pintle is a short vertical pin that fits into a hole in the keel, while the clevis is a U-shaped bracket that connects the rudder to the pintle. With the rudder in place, it's time to move on to the elevator assembly. The elevators are the two smaller pieces of the tail assembly that are located above the rudder. Like the rudder, the elevators are attached to the keel using a pintle and clevis system. Finally, we have the trim tab assembly. Trim tabs are small hinge devices that are used to help control the movement of the rudder and elevators. They're attached to the rudder and elevators using small bolts. And with that, the tail assembly is complete. Of course, we've only covered a fraction of the steps involved in assembling a Boeing 747. In fact, there are literally hundreds of steps involved in creating a single aircraft. But hopefully this gives you a better understanding of the complexity involved in assembling a modern commercial jet airliner. And while you're getting a better understanding of the complexity involved in assembling a modern commercial jet airliner, we take a quick break to mention that we've gotten another channel where we talk about all sorts of cool aviation stuff. There are links to that channel down in the description below. But now let's get back to the topic at hand, making planes. One of the most important parts of any aircraft is the engine. Without an engine, an aircraft is nothing more than a very expensive kite. The engines on a Boeing 747 are located under the wings and are connected to the fuselage using mounts. The engines are started using an auxiliary power unit, or a PU. The APU is essentially a small jet engine. It's used to start the main engines. Once the main engines are started, the APU is no longer needed and can be shut down. You may have noticed that we haven't mentioned anything about the cockpit of the plane yet. That's because there isn't much to say about it. The cockpit is basically just a box with some instruments and controls in it. It's not particularly complex, and it doesn't require much in the way of assembly. Once the cockpit is complete, it's attached to the front of the fuselage using a structure called the firewall. The firewall separates the cockpit from the rest of the aircraft and helps to protect the passengers in the event of a crash. We've now come to the final step in the assembly of a Boeing 747, attaching the interior. The interior of the plane is what you see when you walk through the door. It includes the seats, carpeting, and overhead bins. It's also where all the magic happens. It's like when you order a drink on the airplane and it magically appears in your hands a few seconds later. The interior of the plane is attached to the fuselage using a variety of fasteners, including screws, bolts, and glue. Once the interior is in place, the plane is complete and it's ready to be delivered to its new owner. And there you have it. You've now learned how airplanes are made. Hopefully you've learned a thing or two, and maybe even had some fun along the way. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching.